flip the card and talk a little bit about the Niner defense. It was the first appearance of Jayvon Hargrave. And, when I watched it the first time, Dave, I thought, kind of a quiet performance from Hargrave. But then when I watched the All 22 and when I took it out and I rolled it back and forth and I really looked at it, man, I really liked what Hargrave got done. He only had the one sack, but he is a force on every snap as a pass rusher, and he has to be accounted for. How would you grade out his Niner debut?
Like you said, he's a force. We've seen him up close in person. That lower body strength that he has, it's impossible to get leverage against somebody like Jayvon Hargrave. I feel he's always going to have the leverage advantage, and then he's got the explosion. And you saw it on the sack. I mean, it was a quintessential Jayvon Hargrave sack. Both. Well, I would add Javon Kinlaw into there too. I thought Javon had a nice game, but both of the starting defensive tackles, Hargrave and Armstead, were just absolute difference makers. Even if it didn't show up on the stat sheet all too much. I mean, both of these guys pushed the pocket. Both of them caused issues. And, I thought that the strength of Pittsburgh's line was the revamped interior. I didn't hold their tackles in high regard entering the game. I'm not holding them in high regard exiting the game. But the 49ers dominated the interior line. Between Hargrave and Armstead, they did a lot of damage, and that's going to help those guys on the outside.
Kinlaw, too. Kinlaw had the second highest run defense grade by Pro Football Focus on the Niners to Fred Warner. He only played 24 snaps. But, you heard Shanahan in the day after presser when that first drive, when Najee ran through the C gap and Warner smacked him. Who was controlling the A gap and the B gap all by himself? It was big Javon Kinlaw, freeing up, absorbing offensive linemen, keeping them off of the linebackers' legs, not allowing him to climb to the second level, freeing up Warner and Greenlaw to run and hit, and that's exactly what happened there. So, Kinlaw can be very, very effective without really making any tackles if he can just stay in his lane, absorb offensive linemen, and keep them off of the linebackers' legs. And I thought in this game he did exactly that.
Yeah, and I had predicted all offseason that Kinlaw was going to look better with less on his plate, right? If you're a first-team defensive tackle, the entire 4-3 wide 9 is relying on you to eat space and rush the passer, do all this crazy stuff, which obviously elite players like Hargrave and Armstead can do. But if you're Kinlaw coming off all these knee injuries, that's a lot to ask, right? But he's now in a rotational role behind those two stars, and I think that's the best thing for him, and it turned out that was the case in week 1. So I think the 49ers are really excited about Javon Kinlaw in that lesser role moving forward.
How about Drake and Bosa? Bosa had 3 hurries, 1 run stop. Niners held Pittsburgh to 41 yards rushing. They only ran 10 times. Drake, on the other hand, had 3 sacks, 2 hurries, 2 run stops. Kenny Pickett was under pressure 44% of his dropbacks. He was pressured. Give me your thoughts on how Bosa looked after reviewing the thing. And Drake obviously had statistically his best game. What'd you think when you watched it a second time?
Bosa was I watched it 3 times now total, but every time Bosa to me stood out as such a huge factor in defending the run for the 49ers. And I mean, they chipped the hell out of him. They sent help, but they weren't going to let Bosa wreck the game. They wanted somebody else to prove themselves, and Drake Jackson definitely did, and Hargrave was in there. Armstead was leaving his mark. We talked about Kinlaw. So Bosa just made the 49ers better, period. That was the thing. I think PFF actually had him as their highest graded defender on the game, which just goes to show you, because that's going to, when they grade these players, they're going to take into account when he's double teamed, what his impact is on those kind of plays. And, every single time that I watched, I kid you not, I was more impressed with Bosa's effect on the run, the edge that he set, just the physicality, the attention that he drew. So the sacks will come for Nick Bosa, definitely, because there's going to come a tipping point where you can't let Drake Jackson get 3 sacks a game. You can't let Jayvon Hargrave get a couple sacks a game. You're going to have to start dedicating some attention to those guys. And when that tipping point happens, that's when Nick Bosa is really going to run loose.
Steve Wilks. Let's talk about Wilks for a second. It was his first game as the defensive coordinator. Heck, the last two guys went and became head coaches. So he's in a good spot. He's known as a guy who likes to blitz, but he blitzed Kenny Pickett on only 10 of 52 dropbacks, so just 19.2% blitz rate, which was definitely lower than I thought it would be. The other surprise to me in this game is that the Niners played 63 snaps on defense. 56 of the 63 there were in the nickel. So they were in the nickel basically 90% of the time. They only played 7 snaps in the base defense the entire day. So 89% nickel, 11% base, 19% blitz rate. Were you surprised by anything that you saw from Steve Wilks in week 1?
Well, if you break down the blitz rate, they blitzed on 4 of the first 7 snaps, which was the first quarter. So they brought a lot of heat early, and by the end of the first quarter, they were way ahead. So, you know,
then they played a soft shell.
Yeah. Let's just, I don't think we have a big enough sample yet to see how often they're going to blitz this season, because that was an abnormal game. Let's be honest. No matter how good the 49ers are, they're not going to be going up 20 on teams every first quarter. So let's just wait to see what happens there, because that blitz rate in the first quarter was 50+%. We know that Steve Wilks has blitzed a lot whenever he's been an NFL defensive coordinator prior to this. So that's my thought on the blitz rate. As far as nickel goes, that's a matchup thing, right? 49ers, if depending on the offensive personnel, they're going to run the appropriate defensive personnel, and nickel happened to be the matchup that they wanted.
First half, Ambry played outside, Demo played in the slot. Second half, Lenoir played outside, and Oliver played in the slot. We've been asking kind of how is this going to be broken down. We were kind of told, hey, Lenoir's going to get the smaller slot receivers. Oliver's going to get the big-bodied slot receivers. Allen Robinson, I would say, is probably closer to a big-body veteran slot receiver, but Lenoir was on him early, had a major speed advantage. Oliver was on him late. What did you think of the way he utilized the nickel? And I guess the overarching question in the secondary is, how good is this secondary? And I ask Dave because I'm looking at some of the numbers. The foursome of Ambry, Oliver, Lenoir, and Hufanga were targeted 21 times and allowed 18 catches. Now, a lot of that was they played a soft zone in the second half and allowed the Steelers to kind of just, complete passes in front of them as long as they didn't throw anything over their head. So a lot of that was situation dictated. But what'd you think of the usage of the slot corner, and how would you evaluate the secondary?
Well, Charvarius Ward was ready when Armstead got his hand in Kenny Pickett's face and Deontay Johnson slipped. He was in good position, so that was one of the big plays. Lenoir picked up the personal foul, which was an iffy call. I think the 49ers
hit out of bounds.
Hit out of bounds. Whoever was the first defender that actually made the tackle, Lenoir had already committed before that tackle was made, just in case Najee Harris would have slipped that, Lenoir would have tackled him in bounds. Once he committed, though, with the dive and Harris was out of bounds, it was too late. So it's bang, bang. It's football. It wasn't a dirty play. By the letter of the law, does he deserve the penalty? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think the 49ers are holding that one to, too much against him in the meeting room. But, from a coverage perspective, I thought that he was good. Hufanga, obviously, the pick fell into his lap thanks to great coverage downfield on the tight end from Fred Warner. But the big play from Hufanga was when he got Pat Freiermuth, right? When he just drilled him in the end zone. And that was clean hit, led with the shoulder. It's what you want your safety to do right there. He's got to be an enforcer over the middle of the field. So, I was impressed with the 49ers secondary. I think that when you talk about the nickel rotation, I think they're probably working toward what their stated plan was, which is going to be more of a play-by-play mix and match depending on what the opposing personnel is. But it was also the first time that all 11 of these guys were playing together. Those are complicated substitution patterns. So maybe they said, let's just keep it simple. They're already implementing changes for this first game with a new defensive coordinator. So I think they might have just said, let's keep it simple. Let's run Lenoir slot in the first half, Oliver in the second half, get these guys used to playing with different teammates. And as the season progresses, maybe we'll start to see a little bit more of a complex substitution pattern there.